They say that history is written by the victors. But what happens to a king when the victory is won and the light fades away? Tonight, we are going to leave the golden capital of Leyndell behind. We are going to walk into the cold, gray unknown of the Badlands. This is the story of the Long March, the untold chapter of how Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, lost his grace, and how Hoarah Loux found his purpose. So let the weight of your own day fall from your shoulders, just as he let fall his heavy cloak. Close your eyes. The fire is warm, and the story is waiting. Welcome to Gaming Lore for Sleep. Chapter 1: The Sunset of Grace. The silence was the loudest thing Godfrey had ever heard. It was not the silence of peace, nor the silence of a sleeping child. It was the suffocating vacuum that follows the collision of empires. The battlefield, a sprawling expanse of snow and ash at the foot of the mountaintops, was strewn with the colossal corpses of the fire giants. Their twisted, red-braided bodies lay like fallen mountains, their single eyes staring vacantly into a sky that was already beginning to curdle. Godfrey, First Elden Lord, stood atop the chest of the last fell god. His axe, a crescent of chipped iron the size of a banquet table, rested heavy in his grip. His chest heaved, huge lungs drawing in the frigid air, expelling clouds of steam that mingled with the smoke of the burning Erdtree troops. He waited for the rush, the golden swell, the warmth of the greater will that always followed a victory. It was a sensation like hot mead flowing through the veins, a divine affirmation that this was right, that this was order. But the rush did not come. Instead, a chill wind swept down from the peaks, biting through his golden plate armor. On his back, the great Beast Regent Serosh shifted uneasily. The spectral lion's claws dug into Godfrey's shoulder, not in restraint, as was his custom, but in something resembling fear. The beast let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated against Godfrey's spine. "Quiet, old friend," Godfrey rumbled, his voice a tectonic grinder. "The war is won. Marika's age is secured." "Is it?" The thought was not his own. It was a cold whisper, alien and intrusive. Godfrey looked out over his army. Thousands of knights, the golden host of Leyndell, stood amidst the carnage. They were cheering, raising their spears to the Erdtree that loomed in the distance, glowing with a brilliance that blinded the unworthy. They were the conquerors of the age. Then the light flickered. It happened in a heartbeat, yet it felt like an eternity. The golden hue that saturated the eyes of his soldiers, the visible sign of grace, the blessing of Queen Marika, simply evaporated. The cheering stopped. One by one, the knights lowered their weapons. They blinked, rubbing at their eyes as if waking from a long, bright dream into a dim room. The golden luster of their irises faded, replaced by the dull, muddy colors of mortal men. Brown, gray, blue. Confusion rippled through the ranks like a plague. A standard bearer near the front dropped the banner of the Golden Order. It hit the frozen mud with a wet thud. He looked at his hands, trembling. I cannot feel it," the man whispered. "The guidance, it is gone." Godfrey felt it too. The connection to the Erdtree, that umbilical cord of divine power he had known for an age, was severed. It was a physical amputation. He gasped, dropping to one knee, the sudden hollowness in his soul heavier than any giant's club. "Marika," he croaked. The wind howled in answer. And then her voice came. Not from the sky, but from the memory of the echoes in her bedchamber. A conversation he had thought was a lover's musing, now revealed as a prophecy. "My lord and thy warriors, I divest you of your grace." Godfrey's eyes widened. The gold faded from his own vision, the world sharpening into grim, high-contrast reality. The divine filter was gone. The blood on the snow looked redder. The cold felt sharper. "With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between." "Driven," Godfrey growled, the word tearing from his throat. He stood up, the barbarian Hoarah Loux flaring to life beneath the Lord's regalia. Serosh roared, sinking spectral fangs into Godfrey's neck to suppress the rising rage. But even the Beast Regent felt weaker. "After all we have bled, after the wars of the giants, the Storm Lord, ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die." The betrayal was absolute. It was not a punishment for failure. It was a punishment for success. They had served their purpose. The weapon, having killed the enemy, was now being discarded, lest it cut the hand of the wielder. "Lord Godfrey," the shout came from his lieutenant, a knight named Ordovis. He ran up the slope of the giant's corpse, his helmet removed, his face pale and terrified. "The men, they are weeping. The grace is gone. They say the Erdtree has forsaken us. They await your command to march on Leyndell. We must demand audience with the queen." Godfrey looked down at Ordovis. He saw the fear in the man's eyes, the fear of a child abandoned in the dark. If they marched on Leyndell now, without grace, they would be slaughtered by the Golden Order loyalists. Or worse, they would start a civil war that would undo everything they had just built. Marika knew this. She knew Godfrey would never raise a blade against her. Godfrey straightened. He reached back and patted the massive, ethereal paw of Serosh. "Calm," he signaled. "We are not beasts yet. There will be no march on Leyndell." Godfrey's voice boomed, carrying over the frozen valley. The panic in the ranks silenced instantly. "The queen has spoken," Godfrey lied, or perhaps told the truest truth. "Our war here is done. The Erdtree requires no more blood from us." He unclasped the heavy golden cloak from his shoulders, the symbol of the Elden Lord, and let it fall onto the dead giant's chest. It looked small against the vast, gray sky. "We are no longer of the Order," Godfrey announced, his voice cracking with a sorrow he refused to let become tears. "We are something else. We are those who struggle. We are those who endure." He pointed his axe, not toward the glorious golden tree in the center of the world, but away from it, toward the sea of fog that marked the edge of the map, toward the unknown. "Gather your weapons," he roared, the sound shaking the snow from the pine trees. "Dry your tears. If the grace will not guide us, we will guide ourselves. We march." "Where, my lord?" Ordovis cried, his voice breaking. "Where do we go?" Godfrey looked into the gray distance, where the Badlands waited. A place of rot, war, and starvation. A place where kings died and savages ruled. "To the darkness," Godfrey said softly. Then, louder, "We march." The army moved. It was a funeral procession of the living. They turned their backs on the warmth of the Erdtree. As they walked, the golden sheen on their armor seemed to dull, tarnishing in the damp air. They walked for hours. As the sun set, a true darkness fell, a darkness none of them had experienced in the era of the Erdtree's eternal light. Godfrey took the rear guard. He refused to look back. But as the first night of their exile settled in, a scream rang out from the vanguard. Not a scream of despair, a scream of pain. Godfrey pushed through the confused ranks, his hand tightening on his axe. "What is it? Speak." A soldier lay on the ground, writhing. A black arrow, fletched with crow feathers, protruded from his throat. Godfrey looked up. The fog ahead was swirling. Shadows were detaching themselves from the mist. They were not giants. They were not dragons. They were men, scavengers of the fringe, bandits who preyed on the lost. And for the first time in centuries, Godfrey realized his men were mortal. There would be no rebirth at the foot of the Erdtree for them. If they died here, in this mud, they stayed dead. The shadows hissed, drawing jagged blades. Godfrey smiled. It was a terrifying expression, one that strained the noble features of the Elden Lord and hinted at the chieftain beneath. Serosh bristled, his mane flaring. Finally, Godfrey whispered, hefting his axe, "Something simple." Chapter 2. The Lesson of the Fang. The moon was a chipped shard of porcelain, hidden behind the ceaseless, choking fog. In the lands between, the stars were a faint memory beneath the Erdtree's glow. But here, on the ragged edge of creation, the cosmos was a terrifying, cold abyss. The attackers were a breed of men Godfrey had not seen since he was Hoarah Loux. Scavengers, tribal remnants, the forgotten refuse of the crucible. They were lean, clad in cured hide and stained bone, and they moved with the primal cunning of animals accustomed to permanent hunger. They were fighting the Godfrey his soldiers knew. The serene, unyielding Elden Lord who swung his axe with divine precision and expected his foes to shatter like glass. The reality was far crueler. A huge knight, Sir Alaric, his gold-enameled armor now dulled to bronze, caught a blade to the thigh. The wound was shallow, but the shock of the blood, his blood, which would not be healed by grace before the next dawn, made him stumble. A second bandit, swift as a viper, drove a spear through his visor. Alaric collapsed, a heavy, silent monument to a dead age. The line broke. The Tarnished knights, accustomed to fighting beneath the Erdtree's blessing, where death was only a temporary inconvenience before rebirth, were paralyzed by the finality of their wounds. "Fools, use your shields," yelled Ordovis, desperately holding a square of ground with 5 remaining men. Godfrey did not yell. He moved. He was a hurricane of muscle and iron. The axe, previously a symbol of his lordship, became a ravenous mouth. But this time, his swing was different. It was unpolished. It was low, vicious, and aimed not at the chest, but at the hip, the knee, the ankle, the points of mortal vulnerability. Serosh strained against his back, a silent, furious captive. "Hold, Lord, for dignity, for the order." The thought was a frantic, muffled sound in Godfrey's mind. But Godfrey didn't heed it. He felt the familiar, wonderful heat in his core, the bloodlust. For centuries, Serosh had acted as a tourniquet, clamping it down. Now, the tourniquet was frayed. With every kill, the rage pulsed hotter, a forgotten sun rising inside him. He slammed his axe head down, crushing a bandit's skull into the mud. He didn't pull the weapon free. Instead, he used his armored gauntlet, catching the cheekbone of a second attacker, snapping the neck with a sickening, wet crack. He was no longer fighting for the Golden Order. He was fighting for the meal, for the right of his pack to survive the night. "Look at me," he roared, throwing his head back, his voice thick with the gravel of Hoarah Loux. The remaining bandits froze, staring up at the giant figure, whose gold armor was now smeared with black mud and fresh gore. "This is the Badlands," Godfrey bellowed, gesturing to the chaos. "Here, the grace is a memory. Here, death is a deep hole, not a shallow pond. You want to live." He grabbed the nearest bandit by the wrist, twisted until the bone shattered, and used the man as a shield against a rain of arrows. "Then you must shed the gold." With a terrifying, primal surge, Godfrey tore the breastplate from the dying bandit, exposing the thin, malnourished flesh beneath. He ripped a handful of steaming entrails free, and, in a brutal, deliberate act of terror and instruction, wiped the hot, foul-smelling blood across his own face, across the fatting symbol of the Erdtree on his pauldron. The knights watched, horrified. This was not their king. This was a monster. "It is a land of beasts," Godfrey said, his eyes glittering in the dark, the gore steaming on his brow. "And the beast respects only the fang. If you fight like lords, you die like dogs. If you fight like beasts—" He leaped, a heavy mass of armor and feral intent. He didn't swing the axe. He used the blunt haft to batter a shield into splintered fragments, then dove into the resultant gap, teeth bared, catching a man's throat with his fingers and tearing out the windpipe. "You survive." The last 3 bandits scattered, vanishing into the fog. They had come to feast on the broken, graceful king. They had met a maddened, hungry god. Godfrey stood panting, his armor trembling. Serosh was howling on his back, a soundless scream of spiritual agony. "The shame, Lord, the shame." Ordovis, blade shaking, approached him slowly. The lieutenant looked down at the pile of shattered bodies, then up at his king, a man dripping with the blood of common foes. "My lord," Ordovis whispered, you have brought shame upon the golden lineage." Godfrey lowered his axe, the edge scraping across the frozen ground. He walked over to the body of Sir Alaric, his devoted knight. He knelt, closing the empty eye socket. "No," Godfrey said, his voice flat, exhausted. "Alaric's death brings shame upon the golden lineage, for it could not keep him alive." He stood, looming over the remaining 47 knights, a force reduced by more than half its number by attrition and ambush. "From this night forward," he declared, his gaze locking with every single soldier, "we are not the golden lineage. We are the Tarnished. The name given to us in scorn, we take as our shield. We are the discarded, the forgotten, the ones who had to march. We will learn the lesson of the Fang," he continued, pointing his axe at the sea of fog. "The lesson is this: grace failed you. Blood will not." He gave the order to build fires, not for comfort, but to burn the dead. He then commanded the creation of a massive, crude stone cairn to honor Alaric and the others, the first monument built by the Tarnished, a grave outside the promise of the Erdtree. As he watched the flames lick the sky, another man emerged from the fog. He was a scout from the Badlands tribes, a man of Godfrey's old kin, a Highlander, covered in thick, dark animal furs, his eyes sharp and wary. The Highlander looked at the pile of slain bandits, then at Godfrey, still caked in gore, the gold on his armor barely visible. He did not look at Serosh, the phantom lion. He looked only at the raw, brutal warrior. "Hoarah Loux," the Highlander said, his voice a rasp of recognition. "You have returned to the dirt." Godfrey nodded, wiping the last of the blood from his eyes. "Tell me of this land. Tell me where we can find a place to bleed without freezing to death." The Highlander spat on the ground. "There is a place, but it is not for a king. It is the fortress of the stone-faced men who worship the dying stars. They take all who stray, and they never give them back." Godfrey smiled that awful, feral smile again. "Then tell me where to find them," he commanded. "We need a roof, and a new enemy to teach us how to survive." Chapter 3: The Fortress of Stone Eyes. The march toward the fortress of the stone-faced men was a study in degeneration. Days blurred into a chain of bitter cold, starvation, and constant, minor skirmishes that served as cruel lessons in mortality. The Knights of the Golden Order, once an immaculate force of divine privilege, were now a ragged band of men whose polished armor was pitted, dented, and deliberately layered with grime to break up the golden reflection. The change in Godfrey was more profound than in his men. The high, measured posture of the Elden Lord had been replaced by the low, coiled readiness of the predator. He walked at the head of the column, not like a king leading a procession, but like a chieftain scenting the trail. The feral instincts Serosh had contained for centuries were now permitted to roam free. A great, hungry wolf kept only on a leash, not in a cage. Serosh, the Beast Regent, was the physical manifestation of his conscience and control. Serosh was grace. Now, Serosh was a burden. The lion's ethereal body lay heavily on Godfrey's back, a persistent, mournful moan in the back of his mind. You dishonor the throne, Lord. You lead them to ruin, not dominion. I lead them to life, Hoarah Loux, for he now thought of himself by the old name, replied silently, his eyes on the gray horizon. The fortress appeared through the haze of a sleet storm, a squat, monolithic structure of dark, basalt stone, unnaturally smooth, as if carved by the sea rather than man. It was nestled in a high-walled canyon, guarded by a single, narrow pass, a defensible position of crushing, silent strength. The stone-faced men were named for their helms, visors of unpolished meteorite that masked their features entirely, giving them the aspect of ancient, soulless automatons. They were zealots devoted to the dying light of the stars, worshipping an outer god of cold entropy. We cannot assault that directly, my lord, Ordovis whispered, standing beside Hoarah Loux on a high ridge overlooking the canyon. The archers will butcher us in the pass. They have the high ground, and we have few shields left. Hoarah Loux did not look at him. He was staring at the fortress, his gaze burning through the veil of sleet. They think in the geometry of war, Hoarah Loux said, his voice low and raspy. They think walls, lines, and bows. We think in blood and soil. He turned to his lieutenant, his eyes gleaming with a terrible, familiar gold, not the gold of the Erdtree, but the raw, volcanic gold of pure, unbridled fury. Ordovis, you will take the remainder of the men. You will light a massive fire at the mouth of the pass, and you will chant the old battle hymns of the Golden Order. You will make them believe we intend a frontal assault at dawn. Ordovis swallowed hard. And you, my lord? Hoarah Loux smiled. The king's smile was gone, replaced by the savage, predatory pull of the warrior's lips. I will be the lesson of the Fang. I will teach them that the king is a tool of brute force, not divine strategy. As the sleet turned to a chilling rain, Hoarah Loux stripped down to a loincloth and his leather bindings. He kept only his great axe. He discarded his dull armor, the breastplate and greaves of the First Elden Lord left in a pile of rusted iron on the ridge. The cold did not touch him. Serosh, too, seemed smaller, the phantom lion clinging to his spine, mewling. Godfrey is gone, Serosh, Hoarah Loux hissed, finally speaking to the beast aloud. Here, there is only Hoarah Loux. He handed Ordovis a small, tarnished leather satchel. These are the last of the golden rune shards we carried. Give one to each man. Tell them that if they survive this night, they can use it to buy bread, or a warm bed, or a swift death. But my lord, These are precious, the relics of our age. They are trinkets, Hoarah Loux corrected, hoisting his axe. Our currency now is violence. He melted into the rain and the fog, scaling the sheer, moss-slicked walls of the canyon like an impossibly large ape. For hours, he climbed, every muscle group firing with the efficiency of a weapon honed by centuries of war. He reached the top of the canyon walls moments before midnight. The stone-faced men were positioned opposite the pass, ready for Ordovis's diversion. The fortress was quiet. Hoarah Loux let out a cry, not a battle cry, but a high, shuddering howl that belonged to the wind and the wolf, echoing through the canyon. He landed on the outer wall, killing the first guard instantly by smashing his axe into the basalt and sending a shower of stone splinters and bone into the air. He did not kill cleanly. He butchered. He shattered the stone masks, revealing pale, terrified faces beneath. He used their own short, black iron swords against them. His primal rage, the ceaseless lust for battle, was now completely unchecked. The bloodlust had fully returned. Inside the main keep, the leader of the stone-faced men, a shaman encased in an older, star-pocked armor, looked out at the carnage. He saw only the flash of a massive, naked figure, moving with impossible speed, his body covered in the wet, black blood of his subordinates. Hoarah Loux crashed into the inner court, his body trembling, his senses overwhelmed by the euphoria of slaughter. The air was thick with the copper scent of blood. He had killed perhaps 30 men in 10 minutes. He found the shaman kneeling before a shrine, a black stone altar upon which a pulsing, cold blue light flickered. A great obsidian rune, cracked and pulsing with stellar chill. The star's eye sees all, the shaman chanted, his voice distorted by his helm. It sees the end of your grace, tarnished king. It sees your death. Hoarah Loux roared. He did not care about the star, the shrine, or the prophecy. He cared only about the warmth it could offer his men. He charged the shaman. He did not parry the ritual scimitar. He allowed it to scrape across his thick, scarred forearm, letting the pain fuel his frenzy. He brought his axe down, not at the man, but at the black obsidian altar. The rune shattered with a shriek of cold, compressed light. The blue energy exploded outward, blinding Hoarah Loux for a moment. When he recovered, the shaman was gone, vanished into the shadows of the keep. The cold, sterile blue light was extinguished, replaced by the familiar, hot gold of the bloodlust. Hoarah Loux raised his axe, surveying the courtyard full of corpses. The stone-faced men who had not been killed were scattering into the canyons, defeated by the sudden, terrifying appearance of a demigod who had traded civility for savagery. He sank to his knees, utterly spent, panting like a great, dying beast. Serosh was silent now, his energy completely drained by the raw power Hoarah Loux had unleashed. He was sitting in the cold stone courtyard, a barbarian chieftain who had just won a palace, naked save for a loincloth, covered in the steaming blood of his enemies. He was Hoarah Loux. He was home. Chapter 4. The Taming of the Beast Regent. The fortress of the stone-faced men was a cruel haven. The massive basalt blocks offered protection from the elements, but the interior was a labyrinth of cold, echoing halls and gruesome shrines. Ordovis and the remaining 47 tarnished knights spent the dawn dragging the bodies of their comrades and enemies out into the snow, their movements heavy with a mix of exhaustion and disgust. Their king, Hoarah Loux, was nowhere to be seen. Ordovis found him in the high watchtower at midday, shirtless, seated on a stone ledge that faced away from the lands between. He was cleaning the dried blood from his axe, his movements meticulous and precise, a bizarrely civilized act following the brutal display of the night before. His chest was a roadmap of ancient, white scars, and on his back, Serosh was visible, the great spectral lion resting his massive head heavily on Hoarah Loux's shoulder. The beast looked utterly spent. The divine gold that usually gave Serosh his shimmer was dull, almost transparent. Ordovis stopped several feet away, refusing to step closer. "My lord," Ordovis said, his voice clipped and strained. "The perimeter is secure. The dead are counted and burned. The men are starving, but alive." "Good," Hoarah Loux rumbled, not looking up. "The stores are full of grain and dried meat." The stone-faced men valued the cold stars more than their stomachs. "And the man who slew them?" Ordovis asked, his bitterness sharp enough to cut through the cold air. "Is he well?" Hoarah Loux finally looked at his lieutenant. His eyes, clear and sharp now, held none of the crazed fire of the night before. He looked exactly like Godfrey, the Elden Lord, yet the air around him was dangerously volatile. "The man who slew them saved your lives, Ordovis," Hoarah Loux corrected calmly. "He did what was necessary." "Necessary? You desecrated the body of an enemy. You fought like the chieftain of the savages from the Badlands. You fought as Hoarah Loux, not as the consort of Queen Marika." Hoarah Loux stood up, the movement effortless, his imposing height filling the tower. Serosh lifted his head, a low, warning growl escaping his throat. "Marika discarded us, Ordovis. She sent us here to struggle and die," Hoarah Loux said, walking toward the night. "Do you think the greater will save you from a poisoned arrow or heal your broken bones? It will not. The grace is gone. If I fight like a lord, we all die like dogs." He stopped directly in front of Ordovis, forcing the lieutenant to look up into his face. "You called me Lord Godfrey. That name is dead," he said, tapping his own chest. "The man who survives here is Hoarah Loux. The man you serve is Hoarah Loux. Learn the difference, or you will be buried in the mud like Alaric." Ordovis was shaking, but he held his ground. "I serve the ideal, my lord, the vision of the Golden Order. You swore an oath to Marika to hold the beast caged." Hoarah Loux ran his hand over the neck of Serosh, a strange, weary tenderness in the gesture, and I uphold that oath. After the frenzy, the beast must be tamed anew. He turned and faced the wall, his arms tensed. With a grunt of effort that strained every muscle in his frame, Hoarah Loux drove a dagger, one of the stone-faced men's own black iron blades, into the stone wall. Then, using only his hands, he began to execute a series of slow, agonizingly deliberate movements. He pulled and twisted his massive body in a silent, punishing physical ritual. This was not training. This was self-flagellation. The physical force needed to suppress his latent bloodlust was immense. As he twisted, pulling his torso against the dagger embedded in the stone, his skin broke, not from the blade, but from the spiritual force. Thick, crimson blood began to weep from the ancient scars on his back, the point where Serosh clung to him. Serosh, the Beast Regent, roared, a silent, mental shriek of agony that echoed in Hoarah Loux's mind. The lion was not being restrained. He was being tortured. The act of retaming Hoarah Loux's savage heart manifesting as spiritual agony for the beast. Stop, Lord. You will break us both. The cost of being a king is eternal struggle. Serosh, Hoarah Loux thought, breathing heavily. The cost of being Hoarah Loux is eternal penance. This is the price, Hoarah Loux whispered, his voice catching. The price of the rampage. Every time I shed the Lord to become the beast, I must pay in flesh to bring the Lord back. I must drain the bloodlust before it consumes us both. Ordovis watched, mesmerized by the ritual. This was not the simple rage of a barbarian. This was a dark, necessary liturgy of self-control, a physical manifestation of the Elden Lord's eternal internal war. My lord, Ordovis finally murmured, his tone shifting from accusation to fearful understanding. Hoarah Loux finished his penance. He slowly pulled the dagger from the stone. His back was smeared with blood, his muscles trembling, but his eyes were calm, and the spectral gold of Serosh was beginning to return, if faintly. Take what you need for yourself and the men, Hoarah Loux said, looking at the dagger, which was now stained with blood, but also shimmering with a faint, dark gold. And tell the men that we rest until the third day. Then we find the shaman. Why? Ordovis asked. He is gone. We have the fortress. Hoarah Loux pointed the dagger at the distant, mountainous horizon. He took the knowledge of his master's rune with him. That broken star eye was a source of great power, the power of entropy, of pure coldness. In this land, knowledge is a weapon. If we are to survive the long march, we cannot allow rival gods to claim influence over our territories. We will hunt the shaman, and we will claim the cold, hard logic of the stars to fight the rot of this world. As the sun, weak and distant, sank below the basalt walls, Hoarah Loux looked up. He was a king who had to torture himself to remain a man. He had defeated the great foes of the world, only to find his true. Unending war was with the savage chieftain sleeping in his own soul. Chapter 5. The Geography of Exile. The Tarnished rested for 3 days, but the rest was a pretense. They huddled in the cold, cavernous halls of the basalt fortress, now grimly named Fortitude. The air was thick with the scent of unwashed men and the underlying metallic tang of the stone-faced men's blood. Ordovis, though he understood the necessity of Hoarah Loux's savagery, struggled to maintain discipline. The knights whispered of the king's demonic change, and many eyed their small, meagerly distributed golden rune shards, wondering if they should not simply abandon the long march and try to buy passage back to a kinder land. On the 4th day, Hoarah Loux gathered his men. He was again clad in armor, but it was not the gleaming gold of Leyndell. It was patched, darkened steel taken from the stone-faced men, crudely fitted over his bulk. It was functional, gray, and anonymous. Serosh rested silently on his back, a silent, gold thread tattoo on the steel canvas. "The shaman is close," Hoarah Loux announced, his voice reverberating off the canyon walls. "He seeks to rally his dispersed forces. We will find him and finish the matter." The pursuit took them into the heart of the Badlands, a landscape that seemed crafted by a god specifically to crush the spirit. It was a region of endless, undulating hills of iron-red dirt, where the only vegetation was scrub grass that cut like wire, and the wind carried a perpetual, high-pitched scream. This land was an amplifier for their despair. Unlike the ordered dangers of the lands between, the peril here was the sheer, monotonous lack of grace. One night, Sir Kellen, once known for his booming, cheerful laugh, simply sat down on the red soil one afternoon and refused to move. "What good is this?" Kellen murmured, his eyes fixed on nothing. "I am mortal. I will die. And I will stay dead. Why keep marching? Why fight for this king who has become a butcher?" Ordovis tried to reason with him. "Stand up, Kellen. The king saved us. We must endure for the queen." "The queen banished us," Kellen shouted, the sound cracking with madness. "The queen betrayed us. Look at the sky, Ordovis. Where is her light? There is no light, only dust and the dying stars. I'd rather die here than march another step for a lie." Hoarah Loux watched the scene from a distance. He let Ordovis wrestle the hysterical knight, forcing him to stand and continue. He had no words of comfort. He knew that hope was a poison in this place. Only grim, brutal utility would sustain them. But the psychological rot was infectious. That night, 2 more knights deserted, slipping away into the fog, their small pouches of golden runes their last hope of salvation. Hoarah Loux did not send a patrol after them. They were weak. The weak would die anyway. The lore of the Badlands. As the column marched, Hoarah Loux studied the land as if it were a colossal, sleeping enemy. He realized that the Badlands were not just a barren wasteland. They were a place of primordial truth. He found a set of ancient markings carved into a seam of black rock, symbols far older than the Golden Order. They depicted figures, massive and horned, locked in combat with serpentine, gray entities. He summoned Serosh, who was now slightly stronger, but no less mournful. "What is this place, old friend?" Serosh's thoughts were clearer now, tinged with a deep, weary knowledge. "This is where the greater will's hand is lightest, Lord. Before the Erdtree, before the Golden Order, this land was part of the crucible, the mixing bowl of life. Everything here is raw. Everything here struggles. Why is the struggle so meaningless? Because here, the purpose is not given. It is taken. We are on the edge of the world, Lord, and the edge is sharp. The stone-faced men worship the outer god of the stars because it offers the cold certainty of finality, a purpose found in the inevitability of death. The realization was a hammer blow. Marika had not just exiled them. She had sent them to the one place where they would be forced to define their own purpose, outside the dictates of her order. Their struggle in the Badlands was not against the giants or the dragons. It was against meaninglessness, the shaman's trail. They eventually tracked the shaman to a high plateau, overlooking a vast, circular basin known to the few inhabitants of the Badlands as the Crater of Dust. The air here was strangely still, unnaturally silent. The shaman stood alone on the plateau's edge. His stone helm, shattered the night of the attack, was replaced by a cloth mask. He did not run. "The King of Ashes finds the place of dust," the shaman hissed, raising his hands. "Your bloodlust has guided you, Hoarah Loux. It draws you to power." He stepped back and revealed his prize. He had not just taken the knowledge of the Star-Eye rune, he had absorbed it. His skin was now mottled with patterns of faint, icy blue, and in his hand he held a staff carved from the obsidian altar, humming with cold, quiet power. "The stars promise certainty," the shaman chanted, the air around him dropping instantly. "Your life is disorder. Your kingship is a lie. Why fight the inevitable decay? Come, kneel before the knowledge of your extinction." He slammed the staff into the ground. A field of pure, cutting coldness, a localized blizzard of stellar entropy, erupted, racing toward Hoarah Loux and his men. The air was ripped from their lungs. Hoarah Loux didn't hesitate. He thrust his axe forward and roared, a sound that finally silenced the perpetual wail of the wind. "I am the king of exile," he bellowed. "I do not fight the inevitable. I make my own inevitable." He charged the shaman, straight into the eye of the cold storm. His scarred, mortal flesh, a furious, defiant contrast to the star-stuffed power of his enemy. The confrontation was brutal. The shaman's ice magic was slow but cripplingly powerful, sapping strength and freezing bone. Hoarah Loux endured the pain, letting the cold numb the last vestiges of his old life. He was no longer the lord fighting for an ideal. He was the weapon fighting for his right to simply exist. With a final, desperate roar, Hoarah Loux closed the distance. He grabbed the shaman's staff, the cold searing his hands, and twisted. The obsidian splintered. The shaman shrieked, the blue light draining from his skin. The cold field collapsed. Hoarah Loux did not spare the man. He brought his own axe down, ending the shaman and the threat of the Star Eye's influence in one decisive stroke. Silence returned. But this time, it was not the silence of betrayal. It was the silence of hard-won victory. Hoarah Loux looked down at the fragments of the obsidian staff. Their cold power dissipated. He looked up at his men, 36 remaining, shivering, weary, but alive. He had won them a place to stand. Now, he had to win them a purpose. Chapter 6. The Creed of the Tarnished. Hoarah Loux stood on the highest parapet of fortitude, the wind tearing at his crudely assembled black iron armor. Below him, the 36 remaining Tarnished gathered in the shattered stone courtyard. They were a pathetic sight, a collection of scarred, weary men wearing mismatched hides and dented gold, their faces grimed with the red dust of the Badlands. He no longer saw the proud knights of the Golden Order. He saw a tribe, a pack of wolves driven from the forest, desperate to establish a new den. "We have fought 3 enemies," Hoarah Loux began, his voice a low, gravelly chant that required no shouting to command attention. The first was the giant. That war was Marika's. We won, and we were betrayed. The second was the bandit. That war was of the flesh. We learned that without grace, wounds do not heal, and the dead do not rise. We learned to fight like hungry things. He paused, letting the silence magnify the weight of his words. The third was the shaman. That war was of the spirit. We learned that in this land, there are gods who offer only the certainty of death, and that certainty is a weakness. Hoarah Loux drew his axe and plunged the tip into the cracked basalt stone, the sound echoing like a drumbeat. "The long march is not a path back to Leyndell," he declared. "It is a path away from the lie. From this day, there is no Queen Marika. There is only the tribe of the Tarnished, the 3 laws of exile." The air in the courtyard was thick with tension. Ordovis, standing at the front, listened with a face carved from granite. This was the moment of complete rupture with the past. Hoarah Loux began to speak the laws of the new culture, the words stark and unforgiving. Law 1, the law of the scar. Grace heals all, covers all, and judges all, Hoarah Loux recited, his gaze sweeping over the many cuts and gashes marring his men. In this place, a scar is not a flaw. A scar is proven survival. The man who hides his wounds hides his lessons. When judgment is made, we will not look to the perfection of your armor. We will look to the ugliness of your scars. He walked over to a young squire, a boy named Finn, who had been weeping over his lost hand since the bandit attack. "Finn, you are maimed. You cannot wield a blade." The boy looked terrified. "My lord, but you can see the traps laid by 2 eyes." Not one, Hoarah Loux interrupted, pointing to the boy's remaining, terrified eye. You will be our scout. The maimed are granted the greatest responsibility, for they have paid the highest price for their knowledge. The Golden Order prized the whole and the perfect. The Tarnished tribe would prize the broken and the experienced. Law 2, the law of the harvest. In the Golden Order, abundance was a gift. It was given to us by the Erd Tree, Hoarah Loux continued. Here, abundance is stolen. If you find food, you share it. If you find water, you share it. But you do not wait for the hand of grace to feed you. He pointed to a small, shivering knight huddled near the wall, a man known to hoard rations. Garth, last night you ate 2 shares and claimed illness. You have stolen not from me, but from the man next to you who must fight tomorrow. Garth whimpered, unable to lie. Hoarah Loux made no threat. He simply reached back, and Serosh's spectral head, the mane briefly shimmering with a dark, hungry gold, appeared over his shoulder. The phantom lion looked at Garth, and the man collapsed, clutching his chest, overwhelmed by the spiritual dread of the Beast Regent's proximity. The punishment is not death, Hoarah Loux announced. The punishment is exile. You will walk for 1 day, 1 night, and you will return. If the Badlands allows it, you may rejoin the pack. If not, the Badlands has judged you unfit. The punishment was worse than death. It was the forced encounter with the ultimate meaninglessness, to be cast out alone into the land of eternal entropy. Garth, terrified, was immediately marched out by 2 guards. The Golden Order punished heresy with execution. The Tarnished tribe punished selfishness with isolation. Law 3, the law of the consort. Finally, Hoarah Loux turned to Ordovis, his most loyal, yet most troubled lieutenant. In Leyndell, the king and queen ruled together, one of order, one of war. Here, there is only one will, Hoarah Loux said, his voice hardening. The king is bound to the Beast Regent. Serosh is my conscience, and he is my control. He placed his hand firmly on the lion's head on his back. I will be brutal. I will be savage. I will shed the blood of the innocent and the weak when the pack requires it. But the Beast Regent's purpose is to contain the bloodlust and ensure it serves the tribe's survival, not my own hunger for war. He looked directly at Ordovis. Ordovis, you are my first sentinel. Your role is not to judge my methods, but to judge my outcome. If I ever lead this tribe toward war for the sake of the bloodlust alone, if I turn my fang on our own, then you have the right, granted by me, to rally the others and force the final tamming. This was the deepest lore reveal. The true purpose of Serosh was not just to make him lordly, but to provide a built-in failsafe for his inevitable, cyclical fall into savagery. And Ordovis was now the custodian of that failsafe. Do you accept this law? Hoarah Loux demanded. Ordovis, shaken, but seeing the terrible, necessary control Hoarah Loux was placing upon himself, knelt. I accept, chieftain. for the survival of the tribe of the Tarnished. The king was dead. The chieftain had risen. As the Tarnished men began to move with a renewed, grim purpose, cleaning, organizing, and securing the fort as a home rather than a temporary camp. Hoarah Loux stood alone on the parapet. Serosh lifted his head and spoke, a rare, soft whisper in his mind. You have made a new order, Lord, but no order is ever truly free of its origins. Hoarah Loux looked up at the dying, gray light of the Badlands sky. What is our origin, Serosh? The betrayal, the Beast Regent replied. Marika banished us, so we would grow strong enough to return and shatter her world. You have succeeded in becoming strong, but you have forgotten the true price of that strength. The price of your own children, left behind to rot in Lanedale sewers. The pain of the banished Omen twins, Morgoth and Moog, struck Hoarah Loux like a physical blow. The betrayal was complete. Chapter 7. The Scion's Chart. Weeks bled into months within fortitude. Hoarah Loux's 3 laws brought a brutal structure to the tribe of the Tarnished. The knights, now warriors in hardened, scavenged armor, were learning to survive. Their loyalty rooted in respect for their chieftains, unwavering strength, and self-discipline. They had found their purpose, survival outside of grace. But Hoarah Loux sought a greater purpose, one that justified the betrayal of his children. He sent scouts out in small, 3-man packs, seeking resources, rival tribes, or simply the edge of this endless wasteland. One patrol, led by the scout Finn, now relying on his heightened awareness to compensate for his lost hand, returned dragging a sled. On the sled lay 2 figures, not stone-faced men, but other Tarnished. They were too weak to stand, their armor thin, their faces gaunt. They were not from the original Long March. Their gold-faded eyes, while dulled, carried the confused, frantic look of those exiled decades later. The elder of the 2, a woman with hair like bleached rope, clutched a scroll to her chest. They followed the light, chieftain, Finn reported, his voice low. They came long after us. They are starving. But she wouldn't let go of this. Hoarah Loux knelt beside the woman, his sheer presence a mixture of threat and impossible refuge. Who are you? He rumbled. The last of the Godfrey scions, she gasped, her voice raw. We followed the guidance, the new light of the Erdtree, until it failed. She sent us out here too. She, Marika. The woman pushed the scroll toward Hoarah Loux's great hand. A relic. Our ancestor carried it. A warning. They call it the Scion's Chart. Hoarah Loux unrolled the scroll. It was not paper or parchment, but a sheet of cured, strangely resilient white hide, etched with symbols in a dark, metallic ink. Serosh, on his back, stirred with deep interest. The chart was not a geographic map. It was a timeline of strength. It showed the lands between as a distant, stylized sun. A faint, golden dotted line traced the Long March, leading not to the sea, but to 3 cryptic symbols. a massive, beating heart, labeled Trial of the First Foe, a swirling wind seal, labeled Trial of the Ancient Lord, a shattered, two-headed serpent, labeled Trial of the Shifting Form. The line then curved back, growing thicker, labeled the Return of the Lineage. At the very end of the line, where the final destination should be, there was a single symbol Hoarah Loux recognized with dread. The sigil of the Greater Will, scratched out, with a massive, stylized axe resting across it. Serosh's thoughts were no longer a plea, but a revelation. The prophecy. She did not banish us to die, Lord. She banished us to be forged. Hoarah Loux looked at the map, and the truth of his exile, the terrible depth of Marika's cold calculus, slammed into him. Marika, the eternal queen, was plotting to overthrow the very outer god, the greater will, that gave her power. She had divested Godfrey of grace and sent him to the Badlands to perfect him. The long march was not a punishment. It was a divine training regimen. The trials were not places to conquer land, but places to conquer power. The trials, Hoarah Loux whispered, tracing the map with his finger. What are they? What do they lead to? The woman on the sled coughed, a terrible, rattling sound. Legends. They said the first foe was the great beast we faced for the queen's favor. The heart is where its strength was sealed. The heart of the fire giant's one-eyed god, Ordovis asked, stepping forward, his face aghast. We cannot steal its strength. That is the work of madmen. It is the work of a weapon, Hoarah Loux corrected, his eyes fixed on the final symbol, an axe resting on the greater will. She used us. She sent us to a land without grace, so that we would fight and die without the greater will's interference, growing stronger through hardship. She needed a champion outside of her order's control, a champion who could commit deicide. The thought of his two omen sons, Morgoth and Mohg, left to languish in the tunnels of Leyndell, rose up with terrifying clarity. They were held hostage by the same system Marika intended to destroy. If he returned to Leyndell now, weak and merely surviving, they would remain imprisoned. If he completed Marika's insane, brutal training, he would return with the strength of a god-killer, and no one, not even Marika, could stand in his way. We follow the map, Hoarah Loux commanded, rolling up the science chart and strapping it to the inside of his armor. Ordovis was shaking his head. Chieftain, this is heresy. We were banished, but to challenge the greater will, this is madness. Hoarah Loux turned. The savage chieftain, the discarded husband, and the vengeful father coalescing into one terrible figure. Madness is leaving my sons to rot in the dark, he growled. She wants a weapon. She shall have one. We will conquer the heart, the seal, and the serpent. We will claim the power she intended, and when we return, he looked toward the fading sunlight, which was not the warm gold of the Erdtree, but the harsh, practical light of the Badlands. When we return, we shall decide which god lives and which god dies. The two weak, tarnished scions died that night, their journey complete. But the tribe of the Tarnished had just been given its true, terrifying purpose: to complete the long march, become the divine weapon, and return to shatter the world that had cast them out. Their first destination, a long and perilous march to the site of their greatest victory, to steal the very strength they had spent a lifetime fighting to destroy. Chapter 8: The Crucible's Heart. The Tarnished tribe, guided by the esoteric science chart, marched for 2 grueling months until they reached the edge of the Badlands, where the hostile lands met the chilling foot of the mountaintops of the giants. This was the site of the ancient war, the final battlefield where Godfrey, the Elden Lord, slew the one-eyed fell god. The region was a graveyard of giants, their colossal, petrified forms now covered in snow and ice. The air thrummed with residual, angry energy, the echo of a deity's death. The science chart pointed not to the surface, but to a deep, frozen caldera, the point where the giant's fiery soul was sealed by Marika. The legend was known as the Crucible's Heart, where the primordial power of fire still raged, frozen in time. Marika did not kill the one-eyed god, she sealed it, Hoarah Loux explained to Ordovis, his breath misting in the frigid air. The great rune of the fire giant was anathema to her golden order, but its primordial strength, the fire of the ancient crucible, was too valuable to destroy. She kept it in reserve. And now we steal it, Ordovis muttered, wrapping a thick hide cloak tighter around himself. We become the thieves of our own past. What is this trial, chieftain? What do we fight? We fight the seal itself, Hoarah Loux stated, looking down into the massive, ice-crusted crater. Marika used the concept of order to contain the giant's chaos. The power is guarded not by muscle, but by will. He ordered his men to descend. The floor of the crater was an obsidian mirror of pure ice. In the center stood a single monument, a massive, cracked eye sculpted from gray stone, covered in intricate, interlocking golden runes, the seal of the Golden Order. Within the fissure of the eye, a light flickered, a dim, sickly red. As Hoarah Loux approached the eye, the air grew thick and heavy. The ground did not shake, but the will of the greater will, expressed through Marika's seal, began to push back. The golden runes on the eye pulsed, and the remaining Tarnished froze, gripped by a sudden, intense spiritual paralysis. Their bodies were fine, but their minds were under siege. A voice, resonant and divine, echoed in their collective soul. You are tarnished. You have lost grace. You are unworthy to stand in the presence of order. The voice was not malicious. It was the cold, categorical certainty of a cosmic law. The seal was trying to force them to accept their exile, to kneel to their fate. The other Tarnished collapsed, clutching their heads, tears freezing on their faces. Only Hoarah Loux and Ordovis remained standing, swaying against the tide of divine pressure. Hoarah Loux roared, but the sound was thin and weak against the will. He could not fight this with his axe. Kneel, mortal. Accept your banishment. Your struggle is meaningless. He fell to one knee, the agony of self-doubt overwhelming him. He was the first tarnished. He had walked away. The doubt was paralyzing. Suddenly, Serosh erupted. The Beast Regent, usually suppressed and quiet, tore himself from Hoarah Loux's back, manifesting as a brilliant, shimmering golden lion. The spectral form was colossal, magnificent, and furiously angry. He is not mortal. He is king. He is bound by oath. Serosh bellowed, his voice a furious counterargument to the greater will's calm law. The lion threw himself against the spiritual current. He was the regent, a creature of order, chosen by Marika herself to ensure the success of the Elden Lord. He was arguing with the divine. Serosh looked at Hoarah Loux, his ghostly eyes burning with loyalty. Lord, you must break the seal. I was chosen to bind the beast for the Golden Order, but I am yours. Use the bloodlust. Let the beast run free for the tribe. Show the greater will that your order is stronger than theirs. It was a final, terrible gift. Serosh was giving up his control, his entire purpose, for his master's will. Hoarah Loux saw his chance. The paralysis was broken by Serosh's sacrifice. He focused his mind not on the greater vision of order, but on the single, raw moment. Morgott and Moog, abandoned in the dark. The bloodlust surged. It was not a controlled flare, it was a detonation. Hoarah Loux stood up, and his armored body began to glow with a terrible, uncontrolled red aura. The rage was pure, blinding, and overwhelming. He seized his great axe, and with a guttural, inhuman roar, he brought it down upon the eye. The golden runes of the seal shattered. The stone eye burst apart. The red light inside, the sealed soul of the fire giant, flew out in a torrent of primordial, raw flame. The flame did not burn. It simply entered Hoarah Loux. He screamed, a long, agonizing sound that was half triumph, half torment. The essence of the fire giant's will, the strength of the ancient crucible, merged with his own bloodlust. When he finally lowered his axe, the red glow subsided. Hoarah Loux looked completely unchanged, yet he was utterly transformed. The air around him was warm, heavy, with the scent of sulfur. He had stolen the power of the enemy. Serosh was gone. The spectral lion's light had been completely drained, having sacrificed its spiritual energy to shield Hoarah Loux and break the seal. Only a faint, white gold residue remained on Hoarah Loux's scarred back. Ordovis slowly stood, terrified. The regent. He is gone, chieftain. Hoarah Loux looked at his empty back, then at the shattered eye. He felt stronger, more alive than he had in centuries, but the silence where Serosh used to be was deafening. He taught me the final lesson, Hoarah Loux said, his voice flat with mourning. The only true order is self-will. He looked at the scion's chart. The second symbol, the wind seal, was now their target. He had paid the ultimate price for the first step on Marika's training regimen. He had lost his control, his conscience, and his only true friend. Chapter 9. The Price of the Fire. The power stolen from the crucible's heart settled within Hoarah Loux like a new, burning organ. It was the primordial strength of the fire giant, the raw, ancient force of life's beginnings, now uncoupled from any godly restraint. And without Serosh, the Beast Regent, that power was ungovernable. Hoarah Loux did not sleep. He marched. He felt the ceaseless, low thrum of the bloodlust, amplified tenfold by the giant's flame. It demanded action, demanded violence, demanded the heat of a worthy foe. The other Tarnished noticed the change instantly. The cold, practical anger of the chieftain was replaced by a simmering, volcanic tension. His movements were too sharp, his commands too sudden. He ate little and drank less, fueled only by the internal fire. His eyes, though without the gold of grace, often caught the light with a flicker of angry red. Ordovis watched his chieftain with growing dread. The march toward the Windseal, the second trial on the science chart, located deep in a forgotten canyon range, was fraught with peril. The canyon was home to small, isolated settlements of Badlands clans, tribes who had managed to eke out a meager existence outside of all cosmic allegiance. One evening, the tribe of the Tarnished came upon a cluster of mud brick huts nestled in a high crevice. It was not a fortress, but a small village, mostly women, children, and old hunters. They had nothing of value, save a few scrawny goats and a small well of clean water. The bloodlust screamed in Hoarah Loux's mind. Slaughter them. Take the water. Secure the perimeter with fear. It was not a thought of strategy. It was a compulsion. The essence of the fire giant's chaotic strength demanded a sacrifice. Chieftain, Ordovis whispered, seeing the red flicker in Hoarah Loux's eyes as he stared at the village. They pose no threat. We take the water and leave. We follow the law of the harvest. We take only what is needed. Hoarah Loux's hand was already on his axe. His breathing was heavy, fast. He was losing the internal war. The void left by Serosh was filling up with raw, indiscriminate fury. The weak are a burden, the fire giant's voice seemed to hiss in his own mind. Burn them out. Purge the weakness. Only the strong endure. Hoarah Loux took one massive step toward the village. Ordovis did the unthinkable. He threw himself onto Hoarah Loux's path, planting his feet and raising his shield, blocking the chieftain's view of the village. Stop, Hoarah Loux, Ordovis roared, the sound thin, but laced with the courage of desperation. I invoke the law of the consort. I judge your outcome. You are not securing the tribe. You are serving the bloodlust. Hoarah Loux froze. The man who had been Elden Lord remembered the oath he had forced upon himself, the spiritual leash he had delegated to his loyal lieutenant. The bloodlust raged. Kill the dog. Kill the challenger. assert dominance. Hoarah Loux's hand shot out, grabbing Ordovis by the throat. He lifted the knight effortlessly, holding him suspended in the air. The armor creaked under the pressure of his fingers. "You defy your king," Hoarah Loux hissed, his voice trembling with the effort of holding back. The fire essence within him tried to force his hand to crush the neck. "I defy the beast," Ordovis choked out, refusing to look away, meeting his chieftain's gaze with absolute conviction. "You swore, by the absence of grace, that your war would serve the tribe. The tribe does not need to feast on children. The tribe needs its chieftain, not a maniac god." The other 35 Tarnished watched in frozen silence. They held their breaths, waiting to see if their king would murder the only man who still believed in the rule of law. For a moment that stretched into eternity, Hoarah Loux fought himself. The force that restrained his hand was not spiritual, as Serosh had been. It was pure will. The will of a father who understood that if he killed Ordovis, he would have nothing left to give his sons when he returned. He dropped Ordovis. The knight stumbled, hacking and gasping for air. Hoarah Loux turned away from the village. His entire body was shaking, his muscles locked in a spasm of control. He walked a short distance away, found a sheer rock face, and began to beat it with his bare fists, one after the other, until the stone began to splinter and crack. He released the bloodlust on the inanimate world, his roar deafening. He did not stop until his fists were pulped, and the red aura had subsided, replaced by a cold sweat and exhausted self-loathing. The raw strength of the stolen fire giant essence remained, but the bloodlust was temporarily sated. He returned to the camp, his hands mangled. He looked at Ordovis, who was slowly getting to his feet, eyes fixed on his king. "You held the line, sentinel," Hoarah Loux said, his voice flat, exhausted. "You earned your law." He took the water and led his men around the village, leaving the inhabitants untouched. The price of the fire was the loss of his control, but the strength was his to wield. The next trial, the wind seal, had to be conquered quickly before the beast demanded another offering. The Scion's chart led them out of the canyons and into the high, whispering air of a desolate mountain basin, a place of perpetual wind and strange architectural ruins. The wind seal was here. They found the seal, a vast, crumbling ring of black rock, covered in the ruins of an ancient civilization, the beastmen of Farum Azula, the very foes a Godfrey had fought in his Elden Lord days. The wind whistled through the ruins, carrying the ghosts of their war. In the center of the ring stood a single, weathered axe talisman, shaped like a storm lord's weapon, pulsing with a deep, silent power. "This is the strength of the storm lord," Hoarah Loux said, looking at the artifact. "The strength of ancient authority, the resilience of the dragon's age. We take it, and then we face the final trial." He approached the talisman, knowing he was now unshielded. and that this next power would only make his internal struggle worse. But his path to his sons allowed no retreat. Chapter 10. The Formless Father. The Windseal trial was conquered with chilling speed. Hoarah Loux, his fists still bandaged, did not speak as he approached the great, black ring of the beastman's ruins. The bloodlust, now merged with the fire giant's essence, screamed for carnage, but Hoarah Loux ignored it. He was a perfect weapon now, a conscious mind overriding a catastrophic engine. He simply walked to the axe talisman, the artifact of the Storm Lord's ancient authority. It pulsed with the strength of the wind, the resilience of the storm. He grabbed it, and the talisman dissolved into a current of pure, rushing power, which flooded his body. He was now armored against the chaos of the Badlands, his massive frame holding the raw strength of the crucible fire and the absolute authority, wind. The tribe, now down to 32 souls, barely dared to look at their chieftain. He was terrifyingly whole, yet devoid of the grace that made him human. The trial of the shifting form was the final stop on the science chart. The map led them to a quiet, unassuming pool in a desolate salt flat, a source of brackish, shimmering water known as the Serpent's Spring. This was where the life of the ancient dragons, who could shed their forms, was once revered. The serpent, Hoarah Loux stated, looking at the smooth, deep pool. The great tree that predated the Erd-tree shed its skin. This is the power of change and transformation. He knew what this meant. To claim this power, he would have to face the ultimate shifting form, the one that still held dominion over his soul. He ordered Ordovis to guard the perimeter and walked alone to the water's edge. He looked into the dark surface, and the water rippled. It did not reflect Hoarah Loux, the scarred chieftain. It reflected Godfrey, the First Elden Lord. Clean, gilded, whole, with the shining gold of grace in his eyes. The water shimmered, and from the surface rose a figure, Queen Marika, the Eternal. She was radiant, her form stitched together from pure light and memory, her face heartbreakingly beautiful and impossibly cold. "My lord, my Godfrey," she whispered, her voice like the chime of 1,000 bells. "The game is ended. The training is complete." Hoarah Loux did not kneel. He stood tall, the red light of the bloodlust faintly visible through the seams of his armor. "The long march is not a game, Marika," he growled. "It was a betrayal. You stripped my grace and sent me away to be hammered into a weapon to kill your old master." "I sent you away to be free," the phantasmal Marika corrected, stepping closer. "The greater will demands obedience and stagnation. You needed to struggle outside the order to realize your true strength, the strength to choose your own path. And you have done it, my warrior. You are forged." She raised her hand, and the light of the Erd-tree, warm and pure, shone in the desolate Badlands sky. "The lie is done. Come home, my lord. The throne waits. I will restore your grace. We will reign in eternal peace. The bloodlust will be caged forever, and your sons, the Omen, will be pardoned and brought back to the light. All is forgiven. All is restored. This was the final, devastating trial. A temptation to reclaim everything he had lost: his love, his title, his peace, and the lives of his sons, all without the terrible risk of the inevitable war to come. He could stop being Hoarah Loux and be Godfrey again. He looked at the radiant Marika. Her eyes were not the eyes of the queen who loved him, but the eyes of the divine strategist who was testing her weapon one last time. "You promise peace," Hoarah Loux said, his voice heavy with the knowledge of his sacrifice. "But the only way to have that peace is to fight the unending war in my own soul, without the aid of Serosh. And the only way to free the Omen is to return with the power to tear down the system that caged them." He smiled, a terrible, grim expression that spoke of endless choice and endless pain. "I will not kneel to your illusion, Marika. I will not be your peaceful lord. I choose my own form." He raised his axe, which now shimmered with the combined strength of fire and wind. "Your dream of order is a lie," he roared, "and your restored grace is a gilded cage. I choose the hard road. I choose the tribe. I choose the Omen." He brought the axe down, not on the phantom, but on the surface of the serpent's spring. The pool exploded in a torrent of water and light. The phantom shrieked, the illusion of Marika dissolving into dust and silence. The last sealed power, the power of shifting formless, rushed out and into Hoarah Loux. He felt the knowledge of change, the ability to adapt and strike at the core of form itself. He was complete. He was not a king, not an Elden Lord, not a chieftain, but the tarnished weapon. He turned and looked at Ordovis, who was trembling, but stood ready. "The trials are done, Sentinel," Hoarah Loux said, his voice now calm, deep, and absolutely certain. He felt the terrifying, latent power of 3 sealed deities residing within him. "The long march is over. We have paid the price." He raised his axe, pointing it not at the barren hills of the Badlands, but toward the distant, glowing menace of the lands between. "We go home," he commanded. "We will find the formless mother who claims my son, Moog, and we will find the throne that holds my son, Morgott. We will return as the ones who were discarded. The lands between will break beneath our boots. The long march is complete." Hoarah Loux, stripped of his grace and forged in the trials of the Badlands, is now the ultimate, unbound weapon ready to initiate the final war.